You're dead to me. The words, delivered with a chilling finality, didn't boom, they whispered, a venomous hiss that slithered under my skin. Mark, my boss, the man who'd overseen my career for 7 years, the one who always had a booming laugh and a backslapping camaraderie, was looking at me with an icy disdain I'd never witnessed. His face, usually flushed with self-importance, was a tight mask of fury, his eyes narrowed to slits. We were in his opulent corner office, the city skyline a silent, glittering witness to the implosion of my professional life. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself, to ask what had possibly led to this, but he cut me off, his voice dangerously low. This on that vulgar platform. It's a disgrace. You're a disgrace to this firm. Effective immediately, you're no longer in your position. You're being reassigned to data entry. In the basement. The words landed like physical blows, each syllable a hammer strike against the fragile structure of my life. My life, up until that moment, had been a meticulously crafted facade of success and stability. I was the senior analyst, a rising star at Sterling and Finch, a prestigious investment firm. My days were filled with spreadsheets, market analysis, and the quiet hum of ambition. I lived in a comfortable apartment, drove a sensible car, and had a carefully curated social circle that mirrored my professional achievements. The truth, however, was a much murkier, more complicated affair. Beneath the polished surface, a rot had begun to set in, a subtle but persistent erosion of my peace. Mark, my CFO, was the architect of much of this discomfort. He was a man who believed the world owed him a standing ovation, a man whose ego was as vast as the city spread out before us. He'd cultivated a persona of genial authority, but I'd seen the cracks, the glimpses of a vindictive streak that surfaced whenever his authority was challenged, however subtly. My TikTok account, a whimsical escape, a place where I shared harmless, funny skits about office life, the absurdities, the minor annoyances, the little triumphs, had become my private sanctuary. It was a world away from the stifling pressure cooker of Sterling and Finch, a place where I could breathe, be silly, be myself. I never thought, not for a single second, that it would become the instrument of my downfall. The irony, the sheer absurdity of it, was almost laughable. But here, in the sterile expanse of Mark's office, with his icy pronouncements echoing in the silence, there was no room for laughter. There was only a cold, sickening dread. I remembered a specific incident, about a year ago. It was during a particularly tense board meeting. A crucial deal was on the line, and the pressure was immense. Mark, as always, was the conductor of this orchestra of anxiety. He'd been berating a junior associate, a young man named David, for a minor oversight. David was visibly trembling, his face ashen. Mark's voice, usually booming, had taken on a sharp, piercing quality. Are you incapable of basic competence, David? Is this the best Sterling and Finch can afford? Perhaps we should consider alternatives. Perhaps role here is the one that needs to be re-evaluated. The room had gone silent. The air thickened with unspoken fear. I'd seen David's eyes well up, and a surge of indignation, quiet but fierce, had risen within me. I'd been tempted to speak, to interject, but Mark's glare, a silent, potent threat, had kept me locked in my seat. Later that week, David was gone. Transferred to a dead-end department, then quietly let go. Mark had just shrugged when asked, a casual wave of his hand. He wasn't the right fit, he'd said, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was a pattern I'd observed over the years, a systematic pruning of anyone who didn't perfectly align with his vision, or worse, anyone who showed signs of independent thought. He liked his subordinates to be pliable, obedient, invisible. Then there was the matter of the bonuses. Last year, the firm had performed exceptionally well, record profits, a stellar year. Yet, the bonuses distributed were disappointingly meager, especially for those of us in the analyst divisions who had worked tirelessly. Mark, naturally, had received a staggering sum, a figure whispered about in hushed tones. When a few of us had cautiously approached him, seeking clarification, he dismissed us with a wave. The market is volatile, he'd said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Prudence is key. We must protect the firm's long-term interests. But I'd seen him, a few weeks later, at a high-stakes charity auction, bidding with reckless abandon on a vintage sports car, his face alight with an almost manic glee. The dissonance was jarring, a stark illustration of his entitlement. He could afford extravagance while his employees were denied their due. The resentment had simmered, a low-grade fever that I'd tried to ignore, to compartmentalize. My TikTok was my release valve, a place where I could vent, albeit indirectly, my frustrations. I'd posted a skit once, a humorous portrayal of a boss who preached austerity to his staff while flaunting his own wealth. The irony was delicious, a private joke I shared with my small, but growing, online community. I never imagined Mark would see it. Never imagined he'd connect the dots, that my harmless digital escapades would be twisted into a personal affront. And now, this. The quiet venom of his words, the abrupt dismissal, the reassignment to the basement, it was a calculated humiliation. He hadn't fired me outright, that might have drawn attention. Instead, he was relegating me to obscurity, a slow, painful professional death. I stood there, numb, the cityscape blurring before my eyes. The silence in the office stretched, thick and suffocating. Mark watched me, a flicker of something akin to satisfaction in his eyes. He expected tears, apologies, a desperate plea to keep my job. But the years of simmering resentment, the accumulated injustices, had forged something new within me. A cold, hard resolve. He had underestimated me. He had seen me as a foolish girl playing on a silly app, not as an individual with a keen eye for detail and a growing understanding of the machinations beneath the polished veneer of Sterling and Finch. My TikTok wasn't just a distraction, it was a testament to my observational skills, my ability to discern patterns, to spot the absurdities in the everyday. And Mark's own behavior, his blatant disregard for fairness, had provided ample material. The walk to the basement was a blur. The fluorescent lights of the sterile, windowless room hummed with a low, oppressive drone. My new desk was a chipped laminate monstrosity, surrounded by stacks of dusty archive boxes. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and a faint, metallic odor. My colleagues, the few who ventured down here, offered sympathetic, but wary, glances. They knew. Everyone knew. Mark had made sure of that. The office grapevine was a swift and efficient beast. Whispers followed me as I sat down, the click of the keyboard a lonely sound in the vast emptiness. My fingers, trained to navigate complex financial models, now pecked away at endless rows of data, cataloging past transactions, a meaningless exercise. But as I worked, my mind wasn't on the data. It was replaying Mark's words, his smug dismissal, the cold glint in his eyes. And a thought, insidious and powerful, began to take root. He thought he'd broken me. He thought he'd silenced me. But he'd only given me the perfect motivation. The next few days were a meticulous, silent operation. I didn't confide in anyone. I didn't cry on anyone's shoulder. I simply worked. During my lunch breaks, instead of scrolling through social media, I was meticulously sifting through company financial reports, the ones Mark had signed off on. I wasn't looking for anything specific at first, just letting my instincts, honed by years of analysis, guide me. And then I found it. A series of offshore transactions, a convoluted web of shell corporations, a pattern of discrepancies that screamed foul play. It wasn't just a minor accounting error, it was a deliberate, systematic siphoning of funds. Millions. $14 million, to be precise, meticulously disguised as legitimate business expenses. It was audacious. It was terrifying. And it was irrefutable. My TikTok videos, with their humorous takes on office life, had actually given me a unique perspective on Mark's financial dealings. I'd noticed subtle inconsistencies, coded language in internal memos, and even a few oddly specific requests for personal expenses to be categorized as client entertainment. My hands, usually steady, trembled as I compiled the evidence. I cross-referenced bank statements, transfer records, and internal audits. I created a separate, encrypted folder on a personal drive, meticulously documenting every single anomaly. I didn't sleep much. The adrenaline coursed through me, a potent cocktail of fear and righteous anger. I pictured Mark, his smug face, his dismissive wave, his belief that he was untouchable. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, what I had to do. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice. It was about restoring some semblance of balance to a world he had so carelessly tipped. I knew the rules at Sterling and Finch. I knew the internal reporting structure, the chain of command. But I also knew that going through the usual channels, with Mark at the helm of finance, would be futile. He would bury it. He would spin it. He would make me the scapegoat. So, I chose a different path. A direct path. I waited for Friday afternoon. The office was quieting down. People were eager to start their weekends. Mark, I knew, would be heading to his country club. I logged into my work email, the one he had access to, the one he thought he'd neutralized. I drafted an email. It was short, concise, professional. I didn't use inflammatory language. I didn't make accusations. I simply presented the facts. I attached the carefully compiled evidence, the spreadsheets, the transaction logs, the audit reports. I CC'd the entire board of directors, the CEO, and the head of legal. And in the subject line, I wrote, urgent, financial irregularities regarding CFO Mark Jenkins. I hit send. The click of the mouse echoed in the silent office, a small sound with an enormous consequence. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. I packed my meager belongings from my basement desk, the chipped laminate surface feeling like a tombstone. As I walked out of the building, the evening sun casting long shadows across the pristine marble lobby, I saw the first frantic text messages start to flood my personal phone. Then came the calls. My personal phone, separate from work, was buzzing incessantly. Colleagues, some sympathetic, others clearly loyal to Mark, were reaching out. I ignored them all. I drove home, the city lights a glittering tapestry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a profound, almost unnerving, calm. The fallout was spectacular. My email, sent directly to the board, bypassed Mark's usual gatekeepers and landed like a bomb. Within hours, Sterling and Finch was in crisis mode. Internal auditors, external investigators, the media, they descended like vultures. Mark, who had been enjoying a leisurely round of golf, was reportedly blindsided. His country club membership was revoked within days. He was suspended, then fired, his reputation in tatters. The whispers about his arrogance and entitlement were no longer whispers, they were confirmed facts. The $14 million fraud was exposed, and the consequences for him were swift and severe. Legal proceedings were initiated, his assets frozen. He went from titan of industry to pariah overnight. My family, predictably, was divided. My mother, bless her heart, called me in hysterics, pleading with me to consider the consequences, to not burn bridges. My sister, ever the pragmatist, was more concerned about the potential legal ramifications for. Only my father, a quiet man who had always valued integrity above all else, simply said, "I'm proud of you." He understood. He understood that sometimes, the quietest actions can have the most profound impact. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate Mark's downfall. The satisfaction came not from his suffering, but from the restoration of order, from the fact that a wrong had been righted, however indirectly. I was still unemployed, my career at Sterling and Finch definitively over. But as I sat in my apartment, the city lights a distant shimmer, I felt a sense of profound peace. The humiliation, the injustice, it had all been purged. And in its place, a quiet, unshakable certainty. Sometimes, all it takes is a single, well-aimed email to expose the rot beneath the surface. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply the truth.